Well, thank you for being here. Welcome to everybody who's the audience here in Washington, D.C., and welcome to the audience that is tuning in from around the world in the tens of thousands and dozens of countries. We welcome you. So today's panel brings together three different nation-state leaders with very different perspectives on cyber warfare as a domain of warfare. So I'm going to give just a couple minutes of introduction, and then I'm going to ask each of the panelists to come up here for just 5 minutes and talk in general around this topic at a strategic level. And then we're going to ask a series of questions that each of the panelists will be able to answer, very specific to cyber warfare. So again, I am Dr. Marty Trevino. I am the Artificial Intelligence Officer at a technical company in the United States called Red Alpha. Formerly, I was the Technical Director for Mission Analytics for the National Security Agency of the United States, dealing in cyber. So cyber is an established domain of warfare, as well as a well-established underpinning to the various services, land, sea, air, Army, Navy, Air Force, and as a domain of warfare in itself now. But how we define cyberspace and even cyber warfare is very important to our coming to grasps with this problem, because this is a problem. It is a challenge of our lifetime. A few years ago, Eugene Kaspersky came to Washington, D.C., and he said, if we're not careful, a few years from now, we're going to look back on today with reverence, when the clocks worked and the trains ran and the electricity worked. Mr. Kaspersky's prediction is frightening and resonates very true. We have to get this right. Everything depends on it. We don't function as a global society anymore without cyberspace. So cyber warfare becomes very important to us. But how we define cyber warfare in that domain is critical. And I think we have tremendous opportunity for researchers and military and political leaders to come together and bring a new definition to it. When you think about warfare, even cyber warfare, kinetic military is being well established. We have examples in Iraq, Georgia, the Ukraine, Syria, where nation states have used purely the cyber domain to achieve desirable outcomes. Economically, economic warfare has been waged across the planet since the beginning of time. We have China's unceasing theft of intellectual property is an example of economic warfare. And even politically, political elements are always associated with domains of warfare. Russia's intervention in U.S. elections, U.S. spying on foreign leaders, all of this resonates true today. But when we try and conceptualize this, you hear the same old terms that we've heard for decades. And they're largely military terms, and they're very comfortable to us. But do they really grasp cyber and cyber warfare? And I would say they don't. There's an opportunity. And when you hear the words that we're moving beyond the lines of demarcation, we're preparing the battle space, what does this mean in cyber? Well, we have definitions, but they vary. They vary from organization to organization, from nation to nation, even person to person. And if you go back to what Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd take about 55 minutes to define it and the last 5 minutes to solve it. As we proceed rapidly into the realm of cyber and cyber warfare, as this world evolves before our very eyes, we need to make sure that we engage people from every domain to help us define this problem, to define this challenge. At least we find ourselves in the last 5 minutes trying to solve a problem that we can't even come to grasps with. So we have three distinguished panelists here. I'm going to ask them each to stand up, starting with our closest gentleman here, and take just 5 minutes and begin to discuss cyber warfare as a domain of warfare and as an underpinning to all other domains of warfare. Thank you.
Muy buenos días. En primer lugar, agradecer a la OEA el darme la oportunidad de participar aquí. Es un verdadero honor y un placer el participar en un evento tan importante y no hablo en mi nombre solo, sino en el de la Guardia Civil Española. Así que, sin más, les voy a contar cómo desde España hemos empezado a trabajar, a ponernos todos los actores implicados en este ámbito de la ciberseguridad, a ponernos manos a la obra para intentar hacer del ciberespacio un lugar más seguro y empezar a poner herramientas, poner esfuerzos en que las amenazas pues, disminuyan, sabiendo de en qué paradigma nos estamos encontrando a día de hoy. Para España, el año 2013 fue un año muy importante a nivel estratégico, porque fue el año donde nosotros hemos recogido la Estrategia Nacional de Seguridad, bueno, la segunda Estrategia de Seguridad Nacional, ya teníamos una, pero en el ámbito de las ciberamenazas, que antes lo contemplábamos entre las 7, como la séptima más importante, entre las 9 que teníamos recogidas, pero el año 2013, 2 años más tarde, cuando España recoge 12 posibles amenazas, como no puede ser de otra manera, la primera siempre es la defensa nacional, la 2 es el terrorismo, porque por desgracia venimos arrastrando esa lacra desde hace muchísimos años, cuando ya teníamos prácticamente finalizado el terrorismo nacional de ETA, nos ha aparecido un nuevo terrorismo yihadista, que es el que nos está haciendo cambiar todas las estrategias actuales, pues en el número 3 aparecían ya las ciberamenazas de esas 12, para que vean ya la importancia, ¿no? Como también estamos dentro de la Unión Europea, en 2013 la Unión Europea, crea su estrategia de ciberseguridad, donde nos marca unas líneas a los países, que ahí estamos en la Unión Europea, para hacer un espacio, un Internet más seguro, y nos marca ciertas condiciones para tener unos CER de respuesta, tener unas capacidades operativas para el cibercrimen y el ciberterrorismo, etcétera. Entonces, meses más tarde es cuando España crea nuestra primera estrategia de ciberseguridad nacional. Una estrategia que nos coordina a todos los actores, desde el Ejército, Fuerzas y Cuerpos de Seguridad, jueces, fiscales, el Departamento de Seguridad Nacional, para unar los esfuerzos y marcarnos una línea de acción que tenemos que llevar a cabo para hacer frente a todo lo que nos está viniendo, ¿no? Entonces, a partir de ese año 2013 empezamos a rodar, pero no solo a nivel estratégico. Esas estrategias lo que implicaba era que hiciéramos unos planes derivados, ¿vale?, donde plasmáramos ya de forma más táctica y operativa qué medidas teníamos que tomar. Entonces, marcamos 8 líneas de acción, entre ellos pues, tener capacidades de respuesta ante cualquier ciberataque, aumentar las capacidades en ciberterrorismo y en ciberdelincuencia. Entonces, todos los que estábamos implicados, diferentes ministerios, pues nos tuvimos que arremangar, como hicimos en España, para empezar a dar esos pasos. De ahí, esos planes derivados se van revisando incluso cada 2 años, porque no lo podemos dejar eso en plan estático. Es decir, las estrategias están muy bien, pero son estrategias que tienen que ser dinámicas, no podemos quedarnos ahí. De hecho, España, su última estrategia de seguridad nacional es del 2017, diciembre, 3 meses después de sufrir los atentados de Barcelona, donde comprenderán que le hemos dado mucha más importancia al ámbito de terrorismo y ciberterrorismo. Luego, como esa estrategia ya está unos meses rodando, ahora estamos en aras de hacer nuestra segunda estrategia de ciberseguridad nacional, para que vean que eso tiene que ser de forma bastante dinámica y no quedarnos atrás, ¿no? En el ámbito de también ciberguerra, esto hizo que ya en el año 2013, cuando se creó la estrategia, no que nuestro ejército español no tuviera esas capacidades ciber, pero sí se crea un mando conjunto de ciberdefensa, ¿vale?, para unificar todos esos esfuerzos y sacar un mayor rendimiento para tener esas capacidades. Estados Unidos, en el año 2010, fue cuando tuvo su cibercomando, nosotros 3 años más tarde, ¿vale? Y seguimos pues, potenciando esas capacidades y viendo, ¿vale?, que no podemos quedarnos atrás en este campo, porque casi todas las amenazas, de manera transversal, están afectadas por el mundo ciber. Tenemos una estrategia también de seguridad marítima, pues también tiene una parte ciber. Una estrategia de seguridad energética, pues también tiene su parte ciber, donde tenemos que unificar los esfuerzos para evitar cualquier ciberataque que pueda dañar los intereses de España. Y sin más, voy a parar aquí y luego ya empezaremos con otras cuestiones de preguntas. Muchas gracias.
Buenos dias, bon dia everyone. I'm very happy to be with you this morning to take part in the 2018 South School on Internet Governance. I'm sure many people have, but I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Olga, Adrienne, and other organizers here for getting you all here today and having, I know, what are an intensive week of training here at the South School. I'm also very involved in the internet governance ecosystem and have been for many years, even before I joined the Department of State. So it is a true pleasure to be here with you all today. Let me just say a few introductory comments and then go into a little bit more of the topic at hand. As we move into a more interconnected world, it is critical to bring together diverse groups of people who care about the internet and explore new ideas and solutions to the challenges that we face in promoting a free, open, secure, and interoperable internet. An internet that supports international trade and commerce, strengthens individual national and international security, and fosters free expression and innovation. It is critical that we take the time to think about how all these issues, whether it's cybersecurity or internet governance or online freedom and freedom of expression and international security in cyberspace, are distinct yet related, and it's difficult to think about any one of them in a siloed manner. Your voices and the voices of your policymakers within your governments are an important part of that conversation. So in short, we're very glad to have you here, and welcome to Washington. So as we dive into the topic of the panel, I'd like to start with the definitional matter, not only because it is the U.S. government's preferred approach to these issues, but also because the language we use can shape how we think about conflict in cyberspace in crucial ways. As a general matter, when we consider issues related to conflict in cyberspace, we tend not to frame them in terms of so-called cyber war or cyber warfare. In our view, an armed conflict fought entirely or in or through cyberspace is unlikely. If a state resorts to the use of armed force against another state, for example, the resulting conflict is almost certain to extend beyond cyberspace to involve kinetic operations as well. And then what you will have is not a cyber war, it will just be war. On the other hand, we are frequently seeing a range of malicious cyber activities being carried out today, as we've heard already this morning, during what we call peacetime, producing harmful effects that are outside the context of our armed conflict and below the threshold of what we would consider a use of force. We wouldn't call this cyber war either, but it is a persistent and costly state of affairs that causes economic harm and often threatens our national security. And you can call it a term of that there is conflict. At the State Department, we're very focused on how, as a foreign policy matter, we prevent, respond to, and ultimately deter malicious activity, cyber activity, and cyber attacks, whether occurring above or below the threshold of the use of force. We're also very concerned that many of the unique features of cyber capabilities and cyberspace are potentially destabilizing, and we work to address the risk that malicious cyber activities occurring during peacetime could result in misperception, uncontrolled escalation, and ultimately conflict. Simply put, we want to prevent malicious activities in cyberspace from sparking a war. To accomplish this, we've pursued a multi-layer strategy for over a decade now, aimed at promoting a framework for what we call responsible state behavior in cyberspace. So key to this was developing a consensus on what is responsible behavior in cyberspace. For us, the touchstone is that the same law that applies to state activity in kinetic space, including the UN Charter, international humanitarian law, and international human rights law, applies to state conduct in cyberspace. In addition, the U.S. government has promoted some additional non-binding norms to further clarify regarding what constitutes responsible state behavior during peacetime. These include, for example, a norm against using cyber capabilities to impair provision of critical infrastructure services to the public, or using a CERT, computer emergency response team, for good, not for bad. A second element of our framework is aimed at increasing transparency and cooperation to prevent conflict stemming from state cyber activities through the development and implementation of practical cyber confidence building measures. And all of these efforts utilize tools of diplomacy, tools of international engagement, and applying them to the cyber dialogue. What would be a cyber confidence building measure? Maybe something very similar to what you would do in other confidence building measures. For example, creating a point of contact directory for various types of contacts within your government that can talk to those like contacts in another government. Another one might be sharing what your national strategies are, what your policies are in your national context with others, so that those, knowing those and having a familiarity with those kinds of policies can help to reduce escalation in times of uncertainty. We've had significant success to date working in venues like the UN or regional security organizations, or through bilateral and multilateral statements in gaining consensus for this framework, though more work remains to be done, of course. The progress we have made reflects a strong interest among governments in ensuring a peaceful cyberspace environment where all can reap the benefits of information and communication technologies. Nonetheless, significant, considerable and growing malicious cyber activity carried out by states shows that such consensus is not self-enforcing. In our view, this is in large part because there have not been swift and credible consequences for behavior that acts contrary to the norms of behavior that have been set out. Of course, this brings us to the topic of deterring malicious cyber activity, a very important topic in Washington right now. For a number of years, we have been very clear in our declaratory statements that the U.S. believes a cyber attack could rise to the level of a use of force or of an armed attack, and that we would respond to an armed attack through cyberspace, just as we would to a kinetic armed attack, but using all tools of national power. This includes, of course, military capabilities in kinetic space or other actions. And many other states, as well as NATO, have taken a similar position. As you can imagine, a government doesn't want to provoke a war in kinetic space, won't want to do so in cyberspace either. This should create a deterrent effect. Predictably, therefore, most of the malicious cyber activities that we face today fall below the threshold of the use of force. They cause significant harm in many cases and potentially put us at a long-term strategic disadvantage. But unfortunately, many of our traditional tools for responding are less applicable. Combine that with the challenges associated with attribution and really knowing where and from whom attack is coming, it suddenly becomes much more difficult to respond to malicious cyber activities in a way that is credible and will change the decision-making calculus of foreign government actors. So much of our work today focuses on how to change a dynamic where certain states act with impunity. To do this, as stated in the National Security Strategy released earlier this year, we believe there ultimately needs to be swift and costly consequences for states that act inconsistently with the framework for responsible state behavior that I described. But since the internet is a shared resource, we also think that it is an activity that like-minded governments should be willing to participate in and support. So I've touched on a few things here. I'm happy to discuss this further and answer questions and engage in dialogue with others on the panel and with you all. So I look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Morning. My name's Jim Lewis. Thanks to everyone for coming out. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me. I was trained to observe military conflict, and the way I was trained to do that was by counting. And so let me give you a little perspective here. Sometimes you hear this as an arms race. It's not really an arms race. People pick up these old school terms. No cyber incident has ever gone to the Security Council. And that's indicative in some ways of how the seriousness of this is perceived. There is no such thing as cyber terrorism. People talk about it. It's an easy handle to park this under, but terrorists are not interested in cyber attack. Perhaps that will change someday, but it has not changed yet. Yes, they use the internet for recruitment, for propaganda, for finance, but they don't use it as a weapon. Finally, there's been no casualties and no deaths as a result of cyber attack. And sometimes people say, well, you know, but if you think of WannaCry, the ransomware attack that crippled the UK National Health Service's computers, no one died. So we have to put this in perspective. And you might want to then say, so what? We can go to lunch now, right? This isn't a big problem. I don't think that's right? First of all, we're in a different kind of conflict, and nations will still use cyber techniques to try and coerce each other, to try and change what they will do. This is a new tool for coercion, and we have to think about how people will use it. There's a general disinclination to have a war, to engage in armed conflict. The rate of armed conflict has been going down for decades. In part, this is a response to nuclear weapons. It's just too dangerous for great powers to have wars with each other. That doesn't mean they'll stop fighting or jostling, or they won't try and lean on countries that they want to influence. And cyber is the perfect tool for that. States are the most dangerous actors. Non-state actors do not yet have the capability to launch destructive cyber attacks. That is changing. One of the things to watch is to see if these non-state actors can acquire them. One thing I've wondered about is there is a link to cybercrime in cyber attack, and there's a black market for cybercrime tools. You can hire mercenaries, you can hire websites, you can buy much of what you need on the dark web. So why haven't people bought cyber attack tools, the things that will let you do a Stuxnet or the Ukrainian power grid? Some of it is lack of interest. Cyber criminals are mainly in this for the money. Some of it is fear of consequences. We've heard that people try and stay below a level that would trigger a dramatic response. And some of it is I just don't think they have interest. I mean, for a cyber criminal, the main driver is money. The one exception to that is there are 2 states that support cybercrime and use them as proxies, North Korea and Russia. And so you could see them engaging in some kind of attack using the tools they've also used for cybercrime. But other than that, we just haven't seen it, right? When we look at use of cyber attack, cyber conflict, cyber operations, the use is consistent with larger national policies. So if you are in a conflict of some kind with a country, you will be tempted to use cyber attack. So the US has used it against ISIS. Russia has used it against NATO. Iran has used it against countries in the Persian Gulf. Israel has used it against Iran. All of these are consistent with larger national strategies. And one thing that's important to remember is cyber does not exist on its own any more than airplanes or tanks or ships are independent in some ways. They're part of a larger approach to warfare. There are advantages. You can be a little more covert. You can avoid the risk of escalating conflict by using cyber. So it has some advantages. It can be more clandestine, although that is increasingly diminishing as the ability to attribute spreads both to governments and the private sector. It's an attractive tool, but it will stay below the threshold that we would regard as warfare, because warfare is just dangerous, right? What are the things that people do with it? Well, the first one you'd want to look at is cognitive effect. which is a technical term, but how do I change people's thinking? How do I change how they vote? And we've seen this in the US, we've seen it in Europe, we're seeing it now in Mexico, right? With efforts to use social media, the internet, cyber tools, to have a political effect, to have a coercive effect. If you were looking at Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, it says that you should refrain from doing that. If you look at Article 51 and the inherent right of self-defense, it says you shouldn't do things that damage the political independence of a country. But this happens all the time in cyberspace. People are doing things below the threshold of an armed attack, but that damage political independence. And that's probably its most dramatic effect right now. People worry a lot about attacks on critical infrastructure. It's legitimate to worry about that, but in fact, there's only been 4 or 5 such attacks in the entire history of the planet, right? You saw Stuxnet in Iran. You saw the incidents twice in the Ukraine. There's been an incident in Germany, so perhaps 1 or 2 in Saudi Arabia. We don't want to worry about the wrong things. So the U.S. spent a lot of time building defenses for its critical infrastructure, and that left it vulnerable to this kind of political manipulation. We are unlikely to see international agreement to constrain the use of cyber operations for coercive purposes. I say this as someone who worked from 2009 till 2015 in the UN on international agreements on cybersecurity. There are very deep divisions among the leading countries. Each of them has the same position in some ways. Their position is, if you agreed with me, we would be done. It would be perfect. Unfortunately, neither side agrees with the other, nor is there interest in making concessions at the moment. So I wouldn't hold my breath for international agreement. You will probably see renewed discussions in the UN at the General Assembly this year, leading to another group of government experts, another UN process, probably in the summer of 2019. But they have a very long and difficult path to get to agreement that would constrain cyber warfare. In that perspective, then there's a couple things that countries need to think about. First, many countries have a debate about, well, do I need offensive cyber capabilities? And that's really the wrong question. To be effective, a country needs the full range of capabilities. And to be a good defender, you need to be able to do things that might be interpreted as offensive operations. You might need to go on potential attackers' networks and see what they're planning, what tools they have. This applies to big countries and to small countries. Just as a military now would not rely on the cavalry, on horses, you can't rely on the old tools. You need to have this new tool in your arsenal for your defense. And it's a split responsibility, of course, between law enforcement and the military, whoever else might be involved in this. But having some kind of offensive capability is essential now for self-defense. You need partnerships. No country can defend itself on its own in cyberspace, even the United States. The Chinese are making a good effort to wall themselves off, to build an internal network. It's cost them billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, and it doesn't work. So you need partnerships, and the partners can help you identify, recover, respond, right? Finally, you need to have a larger national strategy on cybersecurity, and I'm sure this is something I know the OAS has worked on repeatedly. Offensive operations, military operations, cyber warfare have to be part of a larger national strategy. 10 years ago or 20 years ago, this was a technical issue, and so we said, oh, let the IT people handle it, let the CERT handle it. That's no longer adequate. We are in a period where the conflicts among states are increasing, where agreement on the rules of international order is eroding, and where countries will be tempted to use cyber means to coerce those who they think they need to coerce. And so you need to be prepared for that with partnerships, capabilities, and a larger strategy. With that, why don't I stop and we can take questions?
Mike.
Okay. So, sorry. So each of the countries has seen a variety of threats and are dealing with a variety of threats at this time. In the next 3 to 5 years, how do you see each of those threats evolving within the prioritization of each country? And that can range from either a nation-state threat or cyber crime versus cyber terrorism or direct attacks against infrastructure. Where do we see things going in the next 3 to 5 years? And I'll just throw that out.
Muy buenas. Bueno, yo daré mi visión sobre el tema desde mi perspectiva policial. Tengo la suerte de dirigir la unidad de ciberterrorismo de la Guardia Civil en España, ¿no? Lo que sí hemos venido observando, el avance en todo lo que son las APTs, amenazas persistentes avanzadas, y estamos viendo la evolución que están teniendo, pero siempre haciendo lo mismo, tema de infiltración, ir escalando privilegios en los sistemas hasta hacerse permanente y luego sacar pues toda la información o todo lo que necesites dependiendo qué motivación tenga ese ciberataque. Como ya saben, nosotros los cuerpos policiales, estados, lo dividimos en hacktivismo, ciberespionaje, ciberterrorismo, cibercrimen y ciberguerra. Pero muchos procedimientos pueden ser similares, pero luego, dependiendo de qué motivación, estaremos hablando de una cosa u otra, ¿no? Entonces, para acá unos años seguirán el tema de las APTs, seguirán evolucionando, porque cada vez son más sofisticadas y, bueno, ¿quién las puede conseguir? Es verdad que hoy en día en la Darknet se pueden conseguir ciertas herramientas para tener estas capacidades, Client as a Service, pero en verdad, pues ¿quién puede estar más en mano de estas herramientas? Pues los terroristas o los estados, personas que tengan capacidad para poder hacer frente a estas cantidades tan grandes o de conocimientos técnicos tan altos o de comprar estos servicios, ¿no? Entonces, el ciberterrorismo, que en verdad, como ha comentado el compañero James, pues por ejemplo nosotros en España los únicos ciberataques que estamos viendo son de escasa cuantía, como son temas de phishing y de negación de servicio, pero no un ciberataque como tal contra una infraestructura crítica. Aunque tenemos que prepararnos, tenemos nuestras legislaciones de protección de infraestructuras críticas, etcétera. Tenemos que seguir avanzando en ese campo, pero no podemos descuidarnos de estar pendiente de esos terroristas que puedan comprar esos servicios y con alguna motivación quieran crear cualquier atentado de gran escala y buscar el terror, como es lo que siempre busca la motivación que tienen los terroristas. Y luego yo creo que el tema de Internet de las cosas deberemos estar bastante pendientes, porque en años venideros yo creo que para el tema de la seguridad pública debemos estar bastante pendientes por el tema de la conectividad, etcétera. Ya saben que los sistemas, todo lo que esté conectado puede ser vulnerable y siempre pues hay gente que en vez de utilizar nuevas tecnologías para hacer el bien, pues lo mira pues para hacer el mal, ¿no? Entonces son sistemas que estarán muy interconectados y habrá que tener una visión especial sobre ese campo. Esa es mi visión.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really hard to look ahead very far in cyberspace, and in fact, in our Director of National Intelligence Worldwide Threat Assessment, they look ahead like a year. But what they said is that the malicious actors that we see, and they call out Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, as well as terrorists and criminals, they will continue to do engage in the kinds of attacks that they have that we have seen so far, probably become more aggressive and more targeted. And we've seen over time, you can follow the trend. It used to be very sort of widespread, not really specifically targeted incidents that we saw in cyberspace. Now they're increasingly targeted, they're increasingly sophisticated, as Santiago said, so we anticipate we can see more of that. But I would kind of like to focus also on sort of the evolution of the defenses that we are also working on. You know, as I said, we've built this growing consensus of norms of behavior, of responsible state behavior in cyberspace. And I think in lots of ways that we, at least in a diplomatic sense, are closing ranks. Jim talked about the importance of partnerships. And those partnerships, I think, cross international efforts, not only in technical matters, not only in law enforcement matters, but also in diplomatic matters. And we've seen the growing effort by regional organizations such as the OAS, such as the ASEAN Regional Forum, such as the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, try to find ways to close ranks, to do a better job of cooperating, to find ways to deter and defend against these increasingly aggressive and sophisticated attacks. So I would hate to have the conversation only about the threats, but also about how we're increasingly working together to defend against them.
So every year I ask heads of intelligence agencies that I know, what do they think about the risk of cyber attack? What do they think about the terrorist threat and cyber attack? And every year they tell me it doesn't exist now, but it will exist in 3 to 5 years. And I used to worry about that but remember the first time they told me that was 2011. So it's kind of a rolling 3 to 5 years. So sure, 3 to 5 years from now, every year they get a little closer. And the ones to watch, the ones that I look at sort of my bellwether, are Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is supported by Iran. Iran and Hezbollah launched some kind of cyber attack against Israeli critical infrastructure every week. And the Israelis have been able to dodge these attacks largely because of a very intensive effort on defense and on counterintelligence, cyber defense. So there's a hint there. When someone like Hezbollah or Iran becomes angry with you, if you are not prepared, you will have trouble. Now, the more interesting one for me is the upcoming election in Mexico, where you've seen some of the tools that we saw used in Britain, France, the Netherlands, the United States, to affect election outcomes, to affect voting. And this is a very difficult problem for democracies because we are committed to freedom of speech. We don't have agencies that censor what you say online. We don't want agencies that would censor what you say online. And so your opponent could take advantage of that. It's a difficult problem that we have to work our way through. How do we deal with fake news, with internet trolls, with these efforts by foreign states or by political groups to use social media to manipulate elections? And I think that's probably the greater threat, at least in the near term, and the one that is also the most difficult for us.
So our panelists bring out at the very end here a very interesting topic that I think most of us understand, that cyber war, cyberspace has multiple dimensions. What we think about in terms of a cyber attack, against a defined target, but also the ability to influence large percentages of the population with very little investment, moderate trade craft, and almost no opportunity for blowback, attribution. So I would ask the panelists here, in lieu of the Cambridge Analytica, the Facebook, the Russian introduction into U.S. elections, Mexico now, et cetera, how do we see handling this from a strategic perspective? Does this fall to a department like Homeland Security in the United States? Does it fall to the corporations simply to police themselves? Do you turn this over to the intelligence services of a nation state? It's a very difficult problem, but I think this is one we're going to have to come to grasps with very, very quickly. So I'll just throw that out for discussion.
So I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what happened with Russian interference in the American election. I hope no one has any doubt that it occurred. And where the U.S. is coming out is, so what should we do in response? So the interference was detected in April of 2016. The U.S. had a response package of both overt and covert measures prepared by August of 2016, and then it didn't do anything. And so that sent a very bad signal. There's a lesson there. If you are attacked and you don't do anything, even if it's just complain publicly, the attacker is only encouraged. And I asked some people in the previous administration, well, why didn't you do anything back? And they said, well, we thought Clinton was going to win. So we thought, well, leave it for them, it'll be their problem. The other part is that there were long debates over what we might call overflight, if you're familiar with that military term. To respond to the Russians, you would have to go through other countries' networks. Do you ask their permission? There was a long discussion of proportionality. What's a proportional response? Do we interfere with their elections? Why bother? It's going to be the same outcome whether we interfere or not. Do we go after Putin? What do we do? And so there's still an ongoing debate in the U.S. of what is the right response to these kinds of things. But there's now consensus in the U.S., and I think Liesl can talk about this, that malicious actions have to have consequences. There has to be some kind of retaliation if we are to make cyberspace more secure.
I guess let me start by saying that I think certainly the way we are dealing with this kind of question is that there's no really one belly button in the U.S. government to push, unless you consider it the sort of what we call the interagency body, because there's equities and expertise and capabilities throughout the government, whether it's the Department of Homeland Security, whether it's the intelligence community, whether it's the law enforcement community, whether it's the diplomatic community, that are all part of dealing with this, with these kinds of issues. And so therefore, when we talk about a national strategy or a national approaches to dealing with any of these issues, we talk about it as a whole of government apparatus, not any one particular agency or body that can deal with it. So because you have to take all the kinds of things into consideration, not only the capabilities that you have, but also the values and foundational freedoms that certainly we have in the U.S. And what are the parameters for which we can respond to something like that? So all of those kinds of, that makes as Jim said, that makes the response or reaction or retaliation very difficult to ascertain and develop. But we are working on how we can do that. And it's not also the, you have to think about it as the credible threat of a consequence as well as what the consequence would actually be. And we're working on that.
So we have just a couple minutes left, and being the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer of a very technical company, I'd like to finish with what I find is passionate, which is machine learning, or artificial intelligence as the buzzword. And those are among the most overused buzzwords in all of technology today. But machine learning is real, and we're advancing into that world so fast, we're struggling to keep up. So I would throw out to the panel, and perhaps we'll begin with the gentleman from Spain, and say, how are you conceptualizing artificial intelligence impacting cyber warfare? And is there an effort to come around with perhaps a national AI strategy? China is leading the way and published a very detailed document a year ago, is funding that in development of AI. How is AI going to affect cyber from your chair? And what where do you think we need to go as nation states to come together around AI and cyber?
Sí, es evidente el impacto de la inteligencia artificial que está teniendo a día de hoy y que va a tener en los próximos años. La verdad que nos va a afectar tanto en el desarrollo de todos los sistemas preventivos y predictivos, pero lamentablemente también el desarrollo de las nuevas ciberamenazas. De hecho, a día de hoy se está utilizando toda esa información para el tema de ciberdelincuencia y ciberespionaje. Como comentaba también antes, cuando sale alguna tecnología nueva, cuando hay ciertas herramientas que pueden sacar una información que puede ser muy útil si se usa de manera buena, ¿vale? Pero siempre hay gente que va a intentar utilizarla con otros fines. Entonces, toda esa información de la inteligencia artificial habrá que estar muy pendiente, porque dependiendo qué uso se le dé, pues estaremos hablando de una cosa u otra, ¿vale? Pero también habrá que aprovechar toda esa información para el tema predictivo, que nos puede ayudar bastante también a los cuerpos policiales en tema de investigación, porque es una información y va a ser una fuerza brutal que nos podrá ayudar a predecir pues bastantes ciberdelitos. Pero esa información puesta en manos que no le va a dar ese buen uso, pues tendremos un problema, porque podrá utilizarlo para, sobre todo, temas de cibercrimen y ciberespionaje.
Sure. So I love artificial intelligence. I can't wait. And I think that every morning when I drive to work, because if a computer is driving the car, it will inevitably do better than about 30% of the drivers on the road. And so people are afraid of it, and I don't think they should be. And, you know, if you think about some of you may have interacted with something kind of like artificial intelligence. You may have interacted with Alexa or Siri or any of these commercial products. And right now, if you said to them, Siri, how should I respond to this cyber attack? It would say back, the nearest pizza parlor is located at 17th and Connecticut, right? So I can't wait for the tools to get better, and they will help us improve our defenses. But here's the bad news. Cyber criminals are very dynamic. They are entrepreneurial. They are fast. And they are already using artificial intelligence to generate new ways to break in and steal your money. So my thing is, bring it on. We can't, it will be a better world. One of the great scientists of the 19th century, a British scientist named Maxwell, said, human progress is measured by our ability to automate routine tasks. And so a lot of what we do now in cybersecurity can be automated, and that will leave us better off.
Wow, Jim, that was a more optimistic remark than I've heard from you in a long time. I'll take it. Well, I'll start by saying I am not a technologist. Don't pretend to be, never really, so I'm not sure I can really answer the nuts and bolts of your question. But I think, let me just sort of riff off my answer to the other question, which was that this really demonstrates that not only the cross-government or whole-of-government approach to these issues is crucial, but also so is the engagement with the private sector, the technologists, the civil society representatives, everybody that has a stake in the use and utilization of this incredible medium and these incredible tools and technologies that have become so important and can provide such great solutions, and in ways to deflect, deter, avoid the malicious behavior that's being used. For many governments, I suspect that that don't have all the technologists or the best technologists in the government. At least I'll speak for my own. They are out there in the private sector, in academia, in universities, in high schools, and so that engagement across the communities is going to be incredibly important to make sure that all of those aspects are taken into consideration. There is a multi-stakeholder way to address the issue, and not one answer is going to be the solution. So it's an ongoing discussion, I think, without necessarily a concrete answer today or tomorrow. Like Jim, I look forward to, I don't know if this is artificial intelligence or not, but, you know, growing up, one of the cartoons I used to watch was called The Jetsons. I don't know if anybody ever watched The Jetsons. Some of those things have come to life, you know, like microwaves, conveyor belts. We haven't got to flying cars yet, but I want that. I want a flying car. The other thing I want the pod that goes over the mom to have her hair and clothes done in a second. So I don't know if that's artificial intelligence or not, but it will save me about an hour a day.
Thank you. So we're coming to the end of this panel. We have time for just a couple of questions for our expert panelists. Anybody with a question?
Hacemos dos juntas y las responden, ¿sí?
Hola, buenos días. Gracias. Soy Aneivi, soy de México. Nosotros estamos trabajando ahora en la implementación de la Estrategia Nacional de Ciberseguridad que se publicó el año pasado. Y, bueno, dos preguntas muy concretas. Sí, en la Ley de Seguridad Española en el año de diciembre de 2017 ya hablan sobre la desinformación. De hecho, no dicen fake news. Incluso hay un informe de un grupo de expertos que dice fake news es el nombre comercial. Aquí hablamos de desinformación y es este tipo de actos. Me llama la atención que en la ley hablan sobre conflictos híbridos, los definen como conflictos híbridos, pero no sé si me podría un poco más explicar por qué esa definición o por qué verlo como un conflicto híbrido y qué implicaría en relación a la ley de España de seguridad. Y otra pregunta rápido, en relación a la ética. Sí, hablamos mucho de cuestión de regulación, estandarización y todo, pero ¿qué tanto tienen que ver las cuestiones éticas en el uso de inteligencia artificial? ¿Cómo pueden venir a ayudarnos a implementar o irnos hacia, ayudar a la ciberseguridad? La cuestión ética, por ejemplo, está el Mellon Report de Homeland Security que emitió sobre la ICT Investigations, son Ethics Principles, y también, por ejemplo, tenemos la ley de Asimov, ¿cierto? ¿Cómo la ética puede venir a reforzar la ciberseguridad? Y esas serían dos. Gracias.
La otra con Patricia por allá y ya no tenemos más tiempo.
Good morning. Thank you for your presentations. When it comes to the conflict among nation states in the cyberspace, in 2017, a group of academics from the US and Europe released a non-binding initiative known as the Tallinn Manual 2.0. Right? This is an attempt to apply regulatory policies from domains beyond national territories, such as the law of the sea and the law of the airspace, into the cyberspace. Responses go from the soft approach, the retortion, to the legitimate use of force in the terms of the UN Charter. What's your opinion of applying this sort of defensive Westphalian model into the cyberspace? Thank you.
Well, let me take that one, and I'll leave the other question to my two fellow panelists. There is some good news in this, in that Russia, China, and the US are in conflict with each other. They disagree on almost everything. But there's an area of agreement, and that is they agree they don't like the Tallinn Manual. Right? Why is that? Because the Tallinn Manual, while a valiant effort, is premature. When you look at things like the Hague Convention, the Geneva Conventions, these are post facto. We have experience. We know what the warfare will look like. And it's that lack of experience that leads countries to say, I am not prepared to sign up to this document because I don't know what the war will look like in the future. It would be like trying to write a nuclear arms treaty in 1908. You wouldn't even know what you were doing. So there's a bit of reluctance, very good work, a very useful academic contribution, and many parts of it may end up eventually becoming international practice, but we're not there yet. I believe that one of the proposals this year in the UN General Assembly will be to take the issue of international law and how it applies to cyber conflict and take it to the 6th committee in the UN, the 6th committee, which is, of course, the legal committee. So they will, of course, look at the Tallinn Manual, but states have to agree, not 12 academics.
Bueno, voy a intentar responder a las dos primeras preguntas, que creo que iban para mí. Decir que el tema de desinformación a nivel estratégico no lo tenemos recogido. Luego, dentro de los planes derivados, para ciberdelincuencia, ciberterrorismo, pues en el primero que teníamos, porque eso son revisiones cada 2 años, tampoco lo tenemos contemplado así, pero habrá que empezar a contemplarlo. De hecho, hace meses, en el intento de referéndum ilegal en Cataluña, hemos tenido ataques activistas de denegación de servicio, algunas páginas no con una gran potencialidad, es decir, han visto vulnerabilidades tampoco muy complicadas y han hecho pues algún tema de defacement o algún ataque de denegación de servicio, pero de duración muy mínima. Pero luego sí hemos tenido todo el tema también de desinformación. Entonces, hasta ahora no habíamos tenido un evento así que hubiera tenido una implicación tan alta. Entonces, imagino que ahora en los siguientes planes derivados empezaremos a tener que tratar este tema. Luego, referente a los conflictos híbridos, no sé si se referirá a lo que estamos viendo, porque claro, un tema de ciberguerra a futuro, que sería ataque a infraestructuras críticas, yo creo que tiene menos posibilidades que lo que se vendrá a hacer, que será más tema de guerra híbrida, campañas de falsas banderas. Es decir, un país se puede desestabilizar no solo con la intervención armada o un ciberataque a infraestructuras críticas, sino si lo tambaleas políticamente o económicamente con todos esos sistemas del arte que hay, como guerra híbrida, banderas falsas, pues consiguen sus objetivos de una manera más, vamos a decir, sin ser tan directa, pero que los efectos pues, pueden ser muy similares. No sé si le contestas esas dos preguntas. Creo que la otra ya era para los compañeros de mesa, ¿no?
I guess I would just try to answer maybe both those questions and with regard to, in a way that says, just as we talk about the applicability of international law to cyberspace, there are a number of ways, I think, that so the analogy can be made with sort of the analog world and the cyber world. So when we talk about, hybrid conflicts, I think Santiago addressed, is that a combination of cyber and physical? Is that a cyber causing a physical? Is it a physical causing a cyber incident? Such, I don't know, like a tree falling down on some power line. You can imagine that there are any number of ways that hybrid issues could be addressed. So I think that taking, to the extent possible where the analog world can apply, is an important step in deciding, do we need something new here? Do we need new ethics just to address an issue that's a new medium, but many of the same aspects of the challenges? So I think those are the kinds of questions we're all grappling with, and trying to use the existing instruments or existing mechanisms to apply rather than trying to create something new. And I think Jim answered the second question. The only thing I'll add to that is that, we all do need creative thinking in these areas. This is new. Trying to put definitions are an issue when we're, do we have the same definition for cyber security, cyber crime? And so I think that's one reason things like the Tallinn Manual or calls for an international treaty on cyberspace, cybersecurity are really premature because we haven't gotten to even that common level of understanding. So it makes the dialogue even more important. It makes your engagement in these issues and those of your governments even more important. And so we certainly look forward to continuing to work with all of your governments, your entities, your institutions, and others on the panel as well. Thank you.
That concludes this panel. I would like to extend a warm thank you to our panelists, to everybody who attended here and everybody who is, again, on the televisions throughout the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.